The gravel cracked beneath the tires as the truck climbed the narrow road that wound into the forest. The trees grew taller the deeper we went, their branches bending toward each other like conspirators. My father hummed tunelessly beside me, tapping the steering wheel. It was the first trip we'd taken together in years, and though I wanted to feel close to him again, the silence between us felt older than either of us could mend. When he spoke, it was only to say, "You'll like Ryan. He's a good guy, been through a lot, but he's solid." I nodded without looking at him. I remembered Ryan vaguely from childhood, his deep laugh, his presence at barbecues, but the image was hazy. Now, Dad's best friend was apparently divorced, living alone, and eager to spend a weekend camping like they used to. I wasn't sure where I fit into that picture. The campsite sat beside a lake so still it looked painted on. Ryan was already there, stacking firewood. He straightened when he saw us, his face breaking into a grin. He looked younger than I expected, short beard, worn flannel, eyes that seemed to take in more than they let on. "Ethan. You're kidding. You were what, 10 last time I saw you?" His voice was deep, smooth, the kind that filled the space it entered. That I shook his hand, trying not to stare too long. "Something like that." Dad clapped Ryan on the shoulder, laughing, and the easy rhythm between them made me feel like an observer, not a participant. They teased each other as they unpacked the truck, trading stories that belonged to another time. As evening stretched across the sky, the lake turned bronze under the fading sun. The air smelled of pine and smoke. I helped Ryan pitch the tents while Dad prepared dinner. He moved efficiently, showing me how to drive the stakes deeper into the ground. When I struggled with one corner, he stepped behind me, reaching around to guide my hand. The brief touch startled me more than it should have. "Like that," he said softly. His breath brushed my ear. "You'll get it." I nodded quickly, stepping back. "Yeah, thanks." When the fire finally crackled to life, we sat around it eating canned chili and talking about nothing important. Dad dominated the conversation, recounting his office stories with exaggerated flair. Ryan laughed at all the right moments, but I caught him glancing my way more than once, his expression unreadable. Later, when the stars came out, Dad yawned and announced he was calling it a night. "Ryan's got the big tent. You two share that one. Mine's smaller, but it'll do." Ryan gave a casual shrug, but I felt something flicker beneath his calm. "Works for me," he said. After Dad disappeared into his tent, the night settled thick and full around us. The fire burned low, throwing shifting shadows across Ryan's face. We sat in silence for a while, listening to crickets and the faint ripple of water. "You don't camp much, do you?" he asked suddenly. That I shook my head. "Not since I was a kid." Dad tried a few times, but we never really stuck with it. He nodded thoughtfully. "He means well, your dad. He just doesn't always know how to connect." That simple statement hit harder than it should have. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's pretty accurate." Ryan leaned back, watching the embers glow. "When I was your age, I thought my dad didn't care about me either. Turned out he was just bad at showing it. Some men are like that." There was no judgment in his tone, just quiet understanding. I felt strangely exposed, as if he'd read something I hadn't said aloud. That he smiled faintly. "You've got his eyes, though. Same color." I looked away, unsure how to respond. Compliments from men weren't something I was used to noticing, but there was a gravity in his voice that lingered. When the fire died down, he stood and stretched, his shadow long and lean in the moonlight. "Come on," he said. "We should get some rest before the rain hits." Inside the tent, the air was warm with the scent of fabric and earth. The space was narrow, our sleeping bags close enough to touch. Ryan unzipped his jacket and tossed it aside, then dimmed the lantern until only a soft glow remained. "Hope you don't mind tight quarters," he said lightly, lying back. "It's fine," I replied, though my heartbeat disagreed. That we spoke a little more, small things about college, about his work as a contractor, but the pauses between words grew longer. Outside, the forest hummed softly. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, but the nearness of his breathing anchored me in place. After a long silence, he said, "You know, your dad talks about you a lot. Says you're smarter than he ever was." I smiled faintly into the dark. "He doesn't say that to me. He's proud, Ethan. Just not good at saying so." There was something kind in the way he said my name. Something too familiar. The tent creaked softly as he shifted, his sleeping bag rustling inches from mine. I could sense him watching me even without turning. The air grew dense, heavy with something unspoken that I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, though my pulse betrayed me. A few minutes passed. Then I felt movement, a subtle one, a turn of fabric, and the faintest brush of his arm near my shoulder. Not a touch, not exactly, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. Neither of us moved. The rain began somewhere far off, a whisper threading through the trees. Maybe it was an accident, I told myself. Maybe he'd shifted in his sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. The space between us shrank with every heartbeat until it was just air, fragile and electric. That I lay still, caught between wanting distance and fearing it. His breathing slowed, deep and steady, and I matched it without meaning to. The sound of rain grew louder, steady now, tapping gently against the nylon walls. It filled the silence like a secret waiting to be told, and in that quiet, I wondered what exactly I was afraid of, the storm outside, or the one beginning within me. The last thing I remember before sleep took me was the faint warmth near my shoulder, and the thought that, come morning, something between us might already have changed. Morning came muted by fog. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every sound dampened beneath the low gray sky. I woke to the soft shuffle of Ryan unzipping the tent, the smell of coffee drifting in with the cool air. He crouched outside, bare-armed, stirring a pot on the small camp stove. "Sleep okay?" he asked without turning. "Yeah," I lied, rubbing my eyes. "You?" He smiled over his shoulder. "Like a rock." I wasn't sure if he was being truthful. His voice carried the quiet calm of someone avoiding a subject neither of us could name. My thoughts drifted back to the night before, the stillness, the closeness, but I buried them as quickly as they surfaced. Dad emerged from his tent a few minutes later, stretching and cracking a joke about old bones. He and Ryan fell into easy chatter about fishing spots and weather forecasts. I stayed quiet, pretending to sip my coffee while my mind replayed fragments I didn't want to understand. By mid-morning we were hiking through the woods, following a narrow trail that wound uphill toward a ridge. The trees dripped from the early mist, and sunlight cut through in broken shards. Ryan walked beside me, a steady presence, while Dad forged ahead humming to himself. "Your dad's got energy," Ryan said with a chuckle. "He does when there's an audience," I replied before I could stop myself. Ryan's glance was quick, amused but sympathetic. "You two not close?" I hesitated. "We used to be. I think we just grew in different directions." He nodded slowly. "That happens more than people admit. My old man and I barely spoke the last 5 years before he passed." His honesty surprised me. The words came out rough, not rehearsed. It made me want to ask more, but the slope grew steeper, and conversation gave way to shared silence, the kind that felt heavier than words. When we reached the ridge, Dad set up a small grill and sent Ryan and me to fetch more water. Down by the lake, the world was still again. Ryan crouched at the edge, filling a bottle, his reflection rippling across the surface. "You ever feel like you're waiting for your real life to start?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him. "All the time." He met my gaze then, a quiet intensity in his eyes. "Don't wait too long, Ethan. Sometimes what you're waiting for passes you by." I didn't know what to say, so I looked away, focusing on the water bottle in my hands. His words lodged somewhere deep, unsettling in their truth. Back at camp, the air had turned warmer. We ate in comfortable silence while Dad talked about an upcoming project at work. Ryan listened politely, but his attention drifted more often toward me. It wasn't overt, just small glances, half smiles, but I felt each one like static beneath my skin. When afternoon clouds began to gather, Dad suggested we nap before dinner. Ryan and I retreated to the tent, the air inside still carrying traces of last night's rain. He stretched out, arms behind his head, eyes closed. "You can rest if you want," he murmured. "I won't snore, promise." I lay down too, though rest felt impossible. The space between us felt charged again, alive with unsaid things. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl moving closer. The first drops tapped against the fabric, and Ryan reached up to tighten a strap near his side. The motion brought him closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "Sorry," he said softly. "It's fine," I answered, though my voice came out thinner than I meant. The rain built quickly, loud and rhythmic. Lightning flashed once, illuminating his face, eyes half open, watching me. "Storm's worse than it looked," he murmured. That I nodded, trying to focus on the sound of the rain. But his presence filled the small space, the warmth of him blurred the line between comfort and something else. That he turned on his side, studying me. "You're quiet again." "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "Then don't." He gave a faint smile. "Silence isn't always bad." For a while we lay there listening to the rain, our breaths almost synchronized. The sound created a cocoon around us, separating the tent from the rest of the world. That he spoke again, quieter. "I shouldn't say this, but, last night, I almost reached out. I thought you were asleep." My chest tightened. I wasn't. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look away. I figured. The air seemed to thicken between us. I could hear every drop of rain sliding down the canvas, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. "I don't know what this is," I said finally. "Neither do I." His voice cracked on the last word. "But I haven't felt close to anyone in a long time." He reached for my hand, hesitant, almost reverent, and stopped just short. "If this makes you uncomfortable, tell me." "I'll stop." I should have. I wanted to. But instead I let the silence answer for me. His fingers brushed mine lightly, barely a touch. The smallest connection, yet it set every thought spinning. It wasn't hunger exactly, it was the recognition of something mirrored, loneliness answering loneliness. The thunder cracked louder. We both flinched, then laughed quietly, the tension breaking for a moment. He leaned back, shaking his head. "Listen to that. Nature's got better timing than I ever will." I smiled despite myself. "Maybe it's a warning. Or maybe it's just noise," he said. "Not everything means something." He withdrew his hand but not his gaze. I turned onto my back, staring up at the trembling fabric ceiling. My pulse refused to slow. Outside, the storm raged on, trapping us in that fragile space between restraint and surrender. Every minute felt stretched thin, teetering towards something neither of us could name without ruining it. At one point, he spoke again, voice barely above the rain. "You remind me of how I used to be. Before everything got complicated." "Is that good or bad?" He smiled sadly. "Both." For a long time, neither of us moved. The storm began to ease, the rain softening into a steady patter. Dad's distant snore carried faintly through the trees. Ryan exhaled slowly, then whispered, "Whatever happens, this doesn't have to mean regret." The words hung there, an invitation, a warning, maybe both. I turned my head toward him. In the dim light, our faces were only inches apart, the smell of rain, the warmth of breath, the faint hum of the forest outside, all blurred into one unbroken moment. I didn't know which of us closed the distance first, or if we even did. The tent seemed to tilt, the world narrowing to sound and silence. Then, as suddenly as it began, Ryan shifted away, his voice rough. "We should rest." I nodded, though sleep was the last thing possible. That he turned his back, and I watched the slow rhythm of his breathing until my eyes burned. Somewhere between exhaustion and confusion, I let my thoughts drift. Outside, the last drops of rain slid down the tent in silver streaks. Inside, the air still carried the weight of something unnamed, something that couldn't yet be undone. When I finally closed my eyes, I knew morning would come with its own kind of storm. The sun rose pale and cold over the campsite, washing the forest in muted gold. I woke before Ryan, lying still, staring at the tent ceiling as my thoughts circled restlessly. The air between us felt different, stretched thin, fragile, as though a single word might shatter what little peace was left. He turned in his sleep, exhaling softly, unaware or pretending to be. When I finally stepped outside, the ground was damp from the storm. My father was by the lake, whistling as he cast a fishing line. He looked content, untouched by the quiet upheaval of the night before. The normalcy of it almost hurt. "Morning," he called. "Ryan still out?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Tell him to get up. I'm not doing all the work myself." I nodded, but didn't move. The lake shimmered under the rising light, and somewhere behind me I heard the faint rustle of the tent flap. Ryan stepped out, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. When he saw my father, his smile came easily, too easily. "Morning, Mark," he said, his voice steady. "Coffee on?" "Of course," Dad said, handing him a mug. They spoke lightly, teasing each other about who snored louder. I stood there, watching them, the absurd normality of it gnawing at me. Ryan's eyes flicked toward me once, just once, but that fleeting look said everything words couldn't. Whatever had happened in that tent wasn't meant to follow us into daylight. Breakfast was filled with laughter that didn't quite reach me. I smiled when expected, spoke when spoken to, but my mind drifted constantly toward Ryan's silence between sentences. He avoided eye contact, focusing instead on small tasks, packing up, checking ropes, tidying the campsite. Each gesture felt deliberate, a quiet retreat. By mid-morning, we began to break camp. My father hummed while folding his tent, oblivious to the undercurrent winding between us. Ryan and I worked in silence, our hands occasionally brushing over the same gear. Each touch carried an unspoken tension, a reminder of the storm that hadn't entirely passed. At one point, I dropped a steak, and Ryan bent to pick it up. Our eyes met briefly, his filled with apology, mine with confusion. He straightened, offering the steak wordlessly before turning away. When everything was packed, Dad suggested one last hike before heading home. The path led through the forest, quiet except for the distant cry of birds. Ryan walked behind us, his usual ease replaced by something distant, measured. We reached a clearing where the light spilled through the trees. Dad paused to tie his bootlace, and Ryan came to stand beside me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. "Are you?" He hesitated. "I'm trying to be." His tone carried an exhaustion that wasn't physical. I wanted to ask what he meant, but Dad stood again, clapping his hands. "Let's keep moving, boys. Storm will come back tonight if we don't hit the road soon." We walked on, the conversation swallowed by the forest. By the time we returned to camp, the air had turned warmer, heavy with the scent of pine and smoke from the dying fire. Dad busied himself loading the truck. Ryan lingered by the lake, skipping a stone across the surface. I watched him from a distance until he finally spoke without turning. "Ethan, come here a sec." I approached, uncertain that he tossed another stone, watching the ripples spread. "I didn't mean for things to get complicated," he said quietly. "Last night, it shouldn't have happened." I swallowed hard. "But it did." He nodded. "Yeah. It did." His voice softened. "I don't regret it. But I can't pretend it didn't cross a line. Your dad trusts me. You deserve more than a secret that'll only hurt you later." The words landed like stones themselves, heavy and final. "So what now?" I asked. He sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now we forget. We keep it where it belongs, in the woods, between the rain and the dark." Anger rose in me, quiet but sharp. "You make it sound like it meant nothing." He turned then, eyes meeting mine with startling sincerity. "It meant too much. That's the problem." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Dad called from the truck, breaking the spell. "Let's go, lovebirds," he shouted with a laugh, unaware of the irony. Ryan forced a smile, shaking his head. "Coming," he called back, then looked at me one last time. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." He brushed past, and just like that, the moment was over. The drive home was long, the road winding through endless miles of forest. Dad talked most of the way, recounting old stories about him and Ryan in college, the pranks they pulled, the girls they chased. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past, each one swallowing another piece of memory I couldn't bear to hold. When we finally reached home, Ryan's car was already there, parked behind ours. He helped unload the gear, cheerful again, performing normalcy with practiced ease. My father thanked him for organizing the trip. Anytime, Ryan said, smiling. Good to get out of the city. Then he turned to me. Take care, kid. Kid. The word stung, not for what it meant but for how deliberately he used it, to create distance, to restore the balance that had tilted too far. I nodded. You too. He drove away a few minutes later. The taillights vanished down the road, leaving the faint scent of pine and rain in their wake. That night, I sat in my room, the silence pressing close. I tried to write, to read, to fill the space with anything that might erase the memory of his voice, his touch, the storm outside the tent. But everything felt hollow. Through the window, the sky was clear again, the moon sharp and bright. I wondered if Ryan was looking at it too, in some quiet apartment miles away, thinking of that same night, the same rain, the same impossible truth that I didn't know if I wanted to forget. Part of me hoped I never could, because for all its wrongness, that brief, flickering connection had cracked something open in me, a truth I hadn't dared to name. It wasn't just desire or confusion, it was recognition. A mirror held up in the dark that I lay back, closing my eyes, letting the memory wash over me one last time, the sound of the rain, the warmth of his voice, the way silence had felt like confession. Maybe he was right. Maybe some things belong to the woods, hidden where no one can judge or understand. But as sleep crept closer, one thought refused to fade. In that storm, I hadn't just crossed a line, I'd stepped into a version of myself I couldn't unsee, and though morning had taken him away, a part of that night would always stay, whispering like rain on canvas, reminding me that some truths don't disappear. They wait, quiet, patient, and unspoken, beneath the surface of ordinary life.